If it's Thursday, the future of the past, a slew of new questions being raised for both parties about their leaders after a second on-camera health scare for Senator Mitch McConnell. Plus, surveying the damage after Idalia 24 hours later as communities start to figure out how to clean up from this storm. The federal government has to figure out how to pay for it. And Trump under oath inside the new testimony coming to light in the former president's legal battle in New York. The other one, as he pleads not guilty in yet another case. And welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington, where we begin once again with an uncomfortable topic in this town. That's just one of the major ongoing issues that erodes trust in government right now. Our rapidly aging political leadership. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell appeared to freeze up again at an event yesterday in Covington, Kentucky. It's a moment that was hard to watch. He was unresponsive for more than 30 seconds, despite being prodded by his staff. It's the second time this summer that we, the public, has seen a moment like this from the Republican leader. We don't know if this has happened at other times without cameras. He also appeared to freeze during a press conference on Capitol Hill late last month. And that time, he was led away by fellow senators, but later joked about Biden stumbling at an event earlier this year.
The president called to check on me. I told him I got sandbagged.
Oh, nice. How are you feeling now, sir? How are you feeling now?
I'm fine.
Have you seen a doctor? Or are you going to
Any idea what happened?
Huh?
Any idea what happened?
I'm fine. That's the
Dehydrated?
Got to watch those sandbags.
So that was after July. Now, after yesterday's incident, McConnell allies said he was momentarily lightheaded and that he would see a doctor before his next event. All of this comes after he was hospitalized with a concussion in March. Today, the Capitol physician said McConnell is medically cleared to work and his symptoms are common while recovering from a concussion. McConnell's office also wanted to make it known that he was back to talking to senators last night. It is important to note the 81-year-old McConnell is not alone in showing his age. California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is 90, missed months of votes after a bout of shingles and has appeared disoriented at times on the Hill, though she doesn't have to do weekly press conferences like Mitch McConnell does. Minnesota Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips posted online yesterday, "For goodness sake, the family, friends, and staff of Senators Feinstein and McConnell are doing them and our country a tremendous disservice. It is time for term limits for Congress and the Supreme Court and some basic human decency." And according to the polls, the American people are essentially on the side of Phillips's beliefs here. In this month's AP NORC poll, more than 2/3 of Americans believe there should be age limits for congressional candidates, Supreme Court justices, and presidential candidates. In that same poll, 77% of Americans and 69% of Democrats say President Biden is too old to effectively serve a second term. Now, the issue of aging is not one that the White House wants to be talking about, which makes an episode like McConnell's a problem for Democrats as well. But Republicans have a problem as well, because it gets a lot harder for them to point to Biden's age issue when their own Senate leader has the same liability, and it appears to be a bigger obstacle for him at the moment. And it bears repeating. By the end of this year, 16 senators, 44 House members, and delegates, as well as one Supreme Court justice, will all be 75 years or older. Ali Vitale is on Capitol Hill for us. Ali Rafa is outside the White House, and in a moment, we'll be joined by someone who's covered McConnell in Congress for a long time, Washington Post senior congressional correspondent Paul Kane. So, Ali, let me start with you. We got, it does seem as if McConnell's office is very sensitive to the perception that he has the ability to lead, the quick calls to leadership, fellow members of leadership, the appearance at the Jim Banks fundraiser, the Capitol physician today. It does seem as if his office has gone into overdrive here.
Well, of course they have, Chuck, and this is not the first time that we've seen them do it. Of course, we had that July incident before the Senate went on recess. I think during that moment, there was a little bit more cover because McConnell was with other senators who were able to sort of pick up where he left off, do that press conference. He was able to come back and then do more Q&A with reporters. I think there was a little bit more visibility into just physically seeing him after an episode like that. Now, though, because this has become a pattern, because it's the second time that we've seen the exact same thing, and in a moment where McConnell was on his own, and so the whole event sort of had to pause while he took the time he needed. Of course, his office is doing a lot to try to show the fact that even though he's out of view of the Capitol, he is still very much at work. And I think that though politics is usually a pretty cutthroat business, what we've seen among Republicans who are in leadership and even those who just talk with him and are allies of McConnell's, they have been quick to say that they spoke to him yesterday, that he was in good spirits, and that he was back to work as usual, showing that picture from the Congressman Jim Banks fundraiser. All of that meant to lend to the picture that he's fine, and he's even getting some bipartisan cover from the president himself. Biden trying to make it so that this is commonplace for someone recovering from a concussion, despite the fact that that concussion was now months ago, Chuck.
Allie, they've not been transparent with the public, and we heard 3 weeks ago from various Republican senators. I can think of Kevin Cramer in particular, who said, they take him at his word, but they'd like a little bit more information, maybe at their own Senate. Essentially, what are we defending here? Tell us more. Is he going to bring a physician to a Senate Republican caucus lunch?
I mean, I think that's a question. Certainly, we have several of them posed to McConnell's office right now about what this looks like going forward. And you've got to imagine when senators come back next week, this is something that they are going to be asked about in the halls, and certainly then ask about during Senate lunch. I mean, this is a moment where, unlike Feinstein, and I'm glad you pointed this out, McConnell does a weekly press conference, and he's going into a very high-stakes time where he and Kevin McCarthy are going to be trying to shepherd their party through a vast range of things that they have on government funding with a looming deadline. This is someone who Republican senators are going to want to feel is in top shape to potentially go toe-to-toe with McCarthy on things like appropriation funding levels, on things like Ukraine funding. These are key fundamental things that they're going to have to deal with, and they're going to want to have confidence in their leadership. So even though right now everything is sort of copacetic, you got to imagine that when people start coming back to town, more questions are going to be raised, and McConnell and his team are going to have answers for it.
They do. It's ironic here. I think it's Democrats in the White House who are more petrified of Mitch McConnell leaving right now.
I think that might be true.
Than Republicans. And that's a whole separate conversation that I'm going to have with the panel. Ali Vitale, thank you for that report. Let me go to Ali Rafa down covering the White House. Ali Vitale sort of previewed, I know where you're going to begin, but we heard an expansive explanation of Mitch McConnell's health. Not from a McConnell surrogate, but from the president, didn't we, Ali Rafa?
Yeah, we heard from the president himself sort of doing what McConnell's office is trying to do, trying to tamp down these concerns over his longtime ally, longtime friend's ability to lead and his mental competency in office. Take a listen to a bit of what he had to say a couple hours ago.
I spoke to Mitch. He's a friend, and I spoke to him today, and he was his old self on the telephone, and having a little understanding of dealing with neurosurgeons and people, and one of the leading women in my staff, her husband's a neurosurgeon as well. It's not at all unusual to have the response that sometimes happens to Mitch when you've had a severe concussion. It's part of the recovery, and so I'm confident he's going to be back to his old self.
And Chuck, Biden allies that I spoke with today about this say that this is a sensitive topic. It's one that raises real questions about fitness for office, but they admit that this does put the White House in an awkward position because they're sort of receiving the echo of attention after these episodes that the minority leader is having. And they're responding to it, as you saw the president say there, sort of like we've seen White House officials and campaign officials react to when we see episodes like this or gaffes by the president. They point to how quickly he's been able to recover. They point to his, as you heard Ali talked about, that doctor's note, similar to the doctor's note that gave a clean bill of health that we saw after the president's physical. So the Biden team is in lockstep with how they address these age concerns. But I think something to watch moving forward, Chuck, is how this gains more attention on the 2020 campaign trail. Of course, more camera time is more opportunity for these things to happen, for the public to see the president have these sorts of episodes, and how the campaign addresses this, whether they send the vice president or more surrogates out on the trail, is something we'll be watching for, Chuck.
No, I mean, it does feel as if they limit his public appearances, which ironically could actually have a reverse effect if you limit the appearances, it makes every appearance more high stakes at some times. Anyway, Ali Vitale, Ali Rafa, thank you both for getting us started on this story. I want to bring in Paul Kane, long time. He's got the gray hairs and the beard to prove it. Long time reporter on Capitol Hill, but really understands sort of the insider aspect to this. And this is what I want to get at. Mitch McConnell woke up this morning, and I assume their entire office knows this. These are politically as smart of people you're going to find in this town. He's got a real problem here because you've got a growing MAGA wing in Capitol Hill, mostly in the House, but it's starting to sit over in the Senate, who aren't fans of Mitch McConnell anyway. You've got a Republican campaign team nationally that wants to make Biden's age the centerpiece of their election. And here's Mitch McConnell, kind of an impediment, both on messaging and they don't like him on policy as it is. How vulnerable could he be here right now, Paul?
It's something that we're really not going to know for sure until next week. I think when the Senate comes back next week and they see him at those Tuesday evening votes, then they have lunches. Senate lunches are these magical things. They are the most important meetings every week, and they'll get to sort of poke and prod at him and see how he handles the issues. Does he talk openly and frankly about it? Does he address the fact that, you know, this is something that's happened twice now, and neither of these two instances have raised alarm? The Capitol Police Security Detail has not rushed him off to a hospital to get checked up. His wife, Elaine Chao, has not rushed into the Capitol.
Do we think it's because this is frequent and we just have only seen it twice? I mean, the way you're introducing this is why I've been very careful to say this is the second incident we've caught on camera.
Yes, it is. It's unclear whether this has happened more than they have let on. He has fallen more often than they had initially admitted. When this fall happened back in March, and then in July when he had this first freezing up moment, they were forced to admit, there have been a couple of other stumbles. Back in October of 2020, he showed up in the Capitol with incredibly badly bruised hands and a puffed up lip. He never explained what that was to anyone, not to the press. He got yelled at me, yelled at other reporters if we asked him questions about it. And he never told his colleagues what went on. He treats his health like he's a member of the Soviet Politburo from 40 or 50 years ago. And if he continues to do that, if he continues to just withhold that information, you might see some in his conference just sort of say, hey, Mitch, you've got to at least tell us what's going on. You know, you've got to give us a sense of your medical timeline. That's what we're waiting to see. And it does pose an issue when you're trying to present the Democratic Party as the party of old forgetful people, which is the main talking point of Republicans.
So when you have, I know the idea that an editorial matters anymore is sort of laughable. That said, National Review, came out about an hour ago calling for him to step aside. Does that have any impact with other Senate Republicans?
Not necessarily. It might give some of them cover to speak out a little bit on the issue, a little bit. See, we have gone through this in the Senate a lot of times, whether it was Ted Kennedy and John McCain.
I can go back to when you and I first started and got to know each other. It was Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms. You know, and they didn't want to show Jesse Helms in the go-kart. You know,
but we have never had a Senate floor leader or the House Speaker, House Minority Leader go through this. It's different. A Senate committee chair, you know, every couple of months, a bill of theirs might be on the floor that they should be leading debate. They have to hold maybe one hearing a week that's kind of important, maybe just once a month. This is the Senate leader. You're supposed to be there every single day, giving a kickoff speech to the morning. You're supposed to hold your weekly news conference. McConnell hosts 3 lunches a week of the Senate Republican Conference. They're supposed to be moments where he exhibits leadership. It's more difficult to sort of hide away if you're in really bad health as the leader.
Let's talk about the issue of nobody knows how to land complicated budget planes like Mitch McConnell. If he's not fully functional, how much How much more likely would you put a government shutdown or impeachment happening? I mean, he is the cooling saucer of the House Republicans right now.
He knows institutionally exactly how to maneuver things. You know, the worst type of sausage making that drives people sort of crazy, that looks ugly and makes no sense, but in the end it gets the job done. He is the master at that. And right now, you've got Ukraine funding, $24 billion at least. You've got a whole lot of emergency funding to help with hurricanes and fires from Hawaii to Florida. All of that needs to also be massaged into just some basic bills to keep the government up and running. And Mitch McConnell right now is the loudest, proudest anti-Putin force in Senate Republican politics. He needs to be there in a forceful manner, and Biden needs him.
I know he does.
Pentagon needs him functioning at that level, because if he has to step down, whoever his replacement is going to be a lesser figure, a not as powerful.
Absolutely. No, there's no doubt. This is, for real congressional junkies here, this is a relationship that's kind of similar to Everett Dirksen and LBJ. It's just sort of Biden needs McConnell. Biden needs McConnell here in a way that's more important in this current moment. Paul Kane, one of the best on Capitol Hill. Thank you, sir. Still ahead this hour, not guilty plea number 4 in his criminal trials is now in the books for the former president, Donald John Trump. What it means for the case in Georgia, the efforts to separate his case from the 18 co-defendants, and what's going on in these other civil cases that also seem to be sucking up the former president's campaign time. Plus, a Proud Boys member is sentenced to nearly 2 decades in prison for his role in the attack on the Capitol. It's a lot less than what the government was hoping for, but it's the most that anybody's gotten. You're watching Meet the President now. Welcome back. If it feels like every day there's a new development surrounding one or more of former President Trump's legal cases, that's because there usually is. Today is no exception. I feel like we have to almost have a daily legal update. So here's what we learned today. Donald Trump's waiving his arraignment on charges related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia, with his lawyers submitting his not guilty plea in writing today. It means he didn't have to come back to Atlanta. Trump's lawyers also filed a motion to sever his case from the 18 other Georgia defendants, arguing they don't have time to prepare properly for an October defense, which you may have a pretty good case to make on that front. It comes a day after 2 of Trump's co-defendants, Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro, also asked for their cases to be severed from the RICO case brought by Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis. And in New York yesterday, the state's attorney general accused Trump of inflating his net worth by more than $2 billion in 1 year. Letitia James made that allegation in a filing ahead of a $250 million civil lawsuit that she's bringing against the Trump family and Trump Organization. Her office also unsealed portions of Trump's 7-hour deposition with investigators from back in April. And if you've ever spent time reading a Trump deposition transcript, it'll look familiar, because according to the transcript of that interview, the former president claimed he never thought his financial statements would be taken seriously and said his brand was worth billions and billions of dollars. He's actually made that claim for years, that somehow there is, that his brand, the name Donald Trump, is worth more money than can be calculated, which is what he always uses when he is a defense when he gets caught inflating. I'm joined now by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney and our NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas, who's also a criminal defense attorney. So Ken, again, I know people need a scorecard to keep up, but let's start with the Trump arraignment today. This was sort of as we expected, but let's get to the issue of severing this case. Everybody else is trying to sever for a speedier trial. Right. He's trying to sever for a delay. In this case, he actually has a pretty good case to make, because he's got other trials he's got to worry about, right?
That's right. And that actually works to his advantage, because if these other defendants actually manage to go to trial before he does, then his lawyers will see all of the evidence, the witnesses, where the vulnerabilities are. That's a really big advantage to Donald Trump. And it's one of the issues that I think people are starting to look at this Georgia case and wonder about a lot of things about it. Some of the charges and the massive amount of defendants and whether it's ever going to get to trial, the track record of that office with some other RICO cases. So some big question marks.
When do we get a final note about, is Chesebro and Sidney Powell, when do we know if that severing has been allowed and that this trial will begin?
When the judge rules, and I'm not 100% sure when that's happening, but I think it's soon.
And on the decision of Letitia James in this deposition, why release it? What was the purpose?
I believe because there was no purpose in keeping it sealed any longer. Portions had already been released. There weren't major revelations in it, but as you and I were talking off the air, it's just fascinating to see how Donald Trump's mind works. And it would be great to have the whole thing made public. People would benefit from seeing it.
All right, another legal development is Rudy Giuliani's defamation. Danny, I'm bringing you in here in a minute, but I want to get a few more updates here. The defamation case with Rudy Giuliani, he's already been ruled to have defamed them. Now there's a trial. Is this a trial we expect to actually happen? Or is this a judge going, you should settle, and you should figure out how to settle? Now, I don't know with what money Rudy can settle with. What's going on?
That's the problem. Yeah. So basically, the judge, because Rudy Giuliani was playing games and not providing the documents and discovery that he should have done, the judge levied the ultimate sanction, which is that a finding of guilt, essentially, that he in fact defamed and committed a civil conspiracy against these two women. And now the only question is how much damages is he going to have to pay? There'll be a trial about that, but not just compensatory damages, punitive damages. But, you know, Rudy's broke, so who knows if he can pay any of this stuff.
All right. You get ready with your Proud Boys answer. I'm going to be asking you about that in a couple of minutes. Let me bring in Danny Savalos here. All right, Danny, first let's start with the severing of cases. Is the fact that the federal case begins when it begins, and he's got these other cases, does that work to his advantage at getting the Atlanta case severed and getting his own timeline?
That's not a strong argument for severing the case. The strongest argument for severing the case is that the different defendants have different charges against them, which is true. There are different counts alleged against different defendants. But that being said, Donald Trump has a weaker argument for severing his case than, say, for example, Sidney Powell or Jenna Ellis, for example, who I believe is only charged with 2 counts. She might have a stronger argument that, look, you will create guilt by association if you put me in the same trial with these other defendants. And I've been involved in large multi-defendant cases like that, and there really is a threat of somebody who's charged with, say, 1 or 2 counts in the same room with the person charged with 50 counts, that some of that guilt will just bleed over in the room to that person. So while I think Sidney Powell's argument for severance is stronger than Trump's, I think all defendants have a decent argument for severance. And look, Fani Willis had to know this was coming. This is going to be a very effective tool against her case, which will really gum up the process. Imagine if there is severance as to at least a few of these defendants in the state court case, and then imagine if some of the defendants are able to remove and stay in federal court. To be more precise, they've already removed to federal court. Imagine if they're allowed to stay there.
Right.
This case now goes on in several different trials in several different courthouses.
But is Fani Willis going to be able to start one of her trials this calendar year? I think that matters a lot if she can, and that's why I'm curious. Is that going to happen this calendar year, in your best guess?
0.0 chance. Now, that leaves open the
not even
numbers in there.
Not even Sidney Powell. You don't think those 2 cases could get started in October?
Oh, I think in theory those could, but and that's only because Cheesebro is asserting his speedy trial rights. But even given that, that doesn't mean that there may be some delay that Cheesebro doesn't get the advantage of. In other words, there may be days or even weeks that don't count towards that speedy trial time. Speedy trial rules are not absolute. Some of the time can count against the defendant. So if Cheesebro were to make a sudden motion right now that would cause delay, he wouldn't get the benefit of that time. You can't assert your speedy trial rights and then do something to slow up the time to trial or add more time until your trial date. So I think there might be a chance that at least the trial date is set for early November. That it's going to go forward on that date, highly unlikely. And don't forget, I just have to add, there is another state RICO case going on in the Fulton County Courthouse. Chuck, it's been in jury selection for 8 months. Not the case in chief, not defense case, not witness testimony, jury selection. This case isn't going to trial probably until 2025.
Quick question about Letitia James and the civil suit in New York. Will Donald Trump have to appear at that trial on a regular basis or not?
No, generally the rule in civil cases as a defendant, you don't have to appear. Strategically, there may be some interest in appearing. And in fact, even plaintiffs don't have to appear at their own civil trials. So there isn't the same rule that there is for a criminal defendant to appear. But even that rule has variations. For example, you just saw with Trump's arraignment, he waived his personal appearance at an arraignment. By the way, any jurisdiction where I can waive arraignment, I do it. There's virtually no reason for your client to come in and stand there for an arraignment. But yeah, on the civil case, on the civil side, even though the AG is a law enforcement body, she's bringing this case as a civil case, he probably will be at none of it.
Back to Ken Delaney. Joe Biggs, one of the longest sentences ever related to January 6th, Proud Boys member, but not as long as the government wanted.
No, and in fact, the second Proud Boys member was sentenced just now. Breaking news, got 15 years, Zachary Real. So this is a judge appointed to the bench by Donald Trump who just didn't see the case the same way the government did. So yes, it's a huge sentence, but the government wanted 33 and 30 years respectively because the government viewed the Proud Boys as more significant contributors to that attack than, say, the Oath Keepers, where Stuart Rhodes got 18 years. And so it's important that this judge didn't see it that way. It's a big chasm. It's kind of a defeat for the government because they...
Interesting. You see this as a defeat? I mean...
In some ways.
Okay.
Because they made a forceful argument that nobody contributed to this attack on the Capitol more than the Proud Boys. Every single breach was led by the Proud Boys. They went there to do violence. They were headed to the Capitol even before Trump made his speech. Which is different from any other defendant, any other group, and they didn't get what they wanted.
All right, this edition of Meet Court TV is now adjourned. Mr. Delaney, thank you. Mr. Savalos, as always, sir, thank you. Coming up, what Georgia's Republican governor is now saying about calls to impeach Fulton County DA Fani Willis. Plus more on that scary moment from McConnell and what it means for the future of our politics here in Washington. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As Trump pleads not guilty in the Georgia election interference case, Republican Governor Brian Kemp is pushing back on calls from his own party, who won a special session of the Georgia legislature to impeach Fulton County DA Fani Willis. Here's what Governor Kemp had to say about the idea.
I have not seen any evidence that DA Willis's actions or lack thereof warrant action by the Prosecuting Attorney Oversight Commission. In my mind, a special session of the General Assembly to end run around this law is not feasible and may ultimately prove to be unconstitutional. The bottom line is that in the state of Georgia, as long as I'm governor, we're going to follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of who it helps or harms politically. Over the last few years, some inside and outside of this building may have forgotten that.
Joining me now on set, Betsy Woodruff-Swan, the national correspondent for Politico and an NBC News contributor, Democratic pollster, NBC News political analyst Cornell Belcher, and Matthew Continetti, the director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Wow, Betsy, that was stronger than I've heard from Mike Pence. That was stronger than anything I've heard from Glenn Youngkin. When I think about the people who want to be seen as the constitutional conservatives here, that was, look, that was a gauntlet.
Yeah, it was very strong. It's also something that Kemp is used to doing. This isn't his first rodeo when it comes to Trump acolytes calling on special sessions to do creative things with state legislative bodies. And of course, he won his gubernatorial reelect despite Trump making lots and lots and lots of noise to the contrary. So Kemp knows what he's doing. He's done this already. And as far as just about any governor, any Republican governor goes, there's hardly one that owes less to Trump than he does.
Matthew, you can't help but continue to look at him as the best guy. You know, when you think it's his baseball playoff time, it's like, who's the emergency starter you want to bring in if your star gets injured?
Right.
That guy looks like the best guy that they have in the bullpen right now.
And has for a long time and had his reelect. But of course, he's not going to enter the 24 race.
Right.
This is a different set of candidates. What's interesting to me about this battle, Chuck, is the state-based civil wars within the Republican Party. Fantastic.
We're starting to see him like this Texas thing.
Texas?
It's a great soap opera, but it's about to unravel the party.
Georgia, we've seen the Republican Party essentially implode in Michigan.
Nevada, we're seeing it a little bit.
It happened earlier in California. As the party becomes Trumpified, you see it almost like a sun when it goes nova, kind of collapses in on itself. And there are politicians like Brian Kemp who are saying, guys, let's take a deep breath and step back from the abyss.
Yeah. And I would go, and I'm a Democrat, but I'm going to say nice things about Kemp. I'm going to say that is an example of why he can win comfortably in a battleground state.
Yeah, and he did.
Statewide, right?
Yeah.
And what you see is on down ballot, these state legislative bodies where they're so gerrymandered, they don't have to worry about winning statewide. But that is a position of a candidate who can win statewide in a purple state, which increasingly Georgia is a battleground state.
It's just interesting in this whole war, right? You have some in the party, Betsy, want to make any of this legal stuff is all politics. And you know, we're sitting here, right? And I think a lot of us are nervous that what if this doesn't work, right? And all of a sudden, the rule of law is subject to the ballot box. That's a scary moment. And I feel like there's, you know, not many people in the Republican Party worried about that. He seems like he's one of them.
No question. And what he's having to grapple with is this new reality that Trump is pushing, which is for Trump himself as an individual person, as a political candidate, his political strategy is his legal strategy. It's entirely within Trump's interests to treat law enforcement as something that's purely political, to treat it as something that the nation, particularly his supporters, should view as purely and explicitly political. And of course, if Trump gets elected in 2024, his first step is going to say, yeah, look, Democrats made this political. I'm just continuing what they're doing and fire the people he doesn't like. And so the challenge, of course, for Kemp and for other more traditional conservative Republicans is trying to decouple those two things, trying to say legal problems and political problems should be different. They should not be married to each other. We could talk about one without talking about the other.
Yeah, the problem is the Republican base doesn't see it that way.
No.
For Republican voters, they think Donald Trump
the
is
information
the victim.
ecosystem has fed them this garbage.
Well, but there's also reality. I mean, Donald Trump is now under 4 different indictments, 2 federal, 2 state and local. And it all happens in the year before the election where he's the frontrunner for the Republican nomination and tied with Joe Biden in averages of national polls. So if you're a Republican grassroots activist, you see that, and you're thinking exactly what you're saying, Chuck, is that politics and the law have become intertwined from the Democratic perspective.
Right. Let's talk about this 14th Amendment stuff.
Do we have to?
I don't want to talk about it as a legal. I don't think there's actually. I think there's a legal. I have legal questions about it. There's no finding yet of an insurrection. But anyway, let's set that aside. Is this the way to defeat Trumpism and Trump?
No, it absolutely isn't. And by the way, if I'm Ron DeSantis or if I'm any of the Republicans running for president, I like this as an option because they're certainly not going to take him out through voting.
Sure.
And quite frankly, I would make the argument that most of them aren't even trying to run a campaign against him. They take him out through voting. Yeah. But ultimately, I think you have to let the people decide on this. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even going to play with it on television. But I don't think any of it passes muster.
It just feels like actually fuel for Trump.
It feels, it certainly appears to the Republican base like it's Democrats and liberals trying to use an avenue other than the democratic process to affect the outcome of what should be a democratic process.
He's trying to avoid the democratic process. It's not good if the left starts to act like.
But let me be clear. Let me speak for the left right now.
Yeah.
I want Donald Trump on that ballot.
Yeah.
Because of the same reason we just talked. I want Donald Trump on that ballot.
The best way to
be careful what you wish for.
Well,
I've seen how he runs into elections.
Let me talk.
I'm fine with
let's bring up Mitch McConnell here. Let me do the National Review's call for his resignation here. No matter what one thinks of his performance in the past, it's tough to see how much longer he can serve as the highest-ranking Republican in the Senate if he is not in a position to handle basic questions from reporters. This is especially true given that Republicans plan to make President Biden's age and declining mental state a central part of their argument against him next year. Look, the fact is, Joe Biden did more to defend Mitch McConnell than any Republican has in the last 24 hours, Matthew.
Interesting, wasn't it? And the McConnell team rushing into action, showing him with Senate candidate Jim Banks of Indiana at the fundraiser answering questions, the doctor clearing McConnell, the idea that he is ready for action. And I think the test will be this next month, Chuck. There is so much going on legislatively that you wouldn't want a leader who's on top of things in order to command.
Betsy, what happens if Donald Trump decides, I can get him now? He's been trying to get rid of McConnell, and he calls up one of the Johns and says, you've got my endorsement if you go.
He's been trying that for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think what the Johns understand is that McConnell's days leading the Senate Republican Conference are numbered. They don't know how big that number is.
The
but
Johns,
they know he's
by the
not
way, John
be there.
Thune, John Barrasso, John Cornyn, the 3 other members of leadership, the 3 Johns. We expect 2 of them to run as a ticket, actually. I think Thune and Barrasso, if this happens, but we'll see.
from their standpoint, it seems pretty obvious that trying to speed up a process that is inevitable would be politically foolish. One note, the National Review editorial itself is interesting because although National Review broadly does not have a great relationship with the Republican primary electorate, it is very widely read among the Senate Republican Congress.
That's the thing.
That's why this editorial is important, is because that group of people is very much NR's audience.
And Cornell, you think the White House wants to do a budget negotiation without Mitch McConnell in the room right now? I mean, ironically, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's like, I think this Biden White House is petrified of going into the fall without McConnell.
Well, that's why the president was one of his strongest defenders, right? Mitch McConnell's, and by the way, let's all pray that he's fine. And look, a different side, but let's hope he's one. That was a scary moment. But yeah, Mitch McConnell is one of the adults in the room. And what we've seen from the House side of things is there are no adults in the room at all there, and God help us.
Ironically, Matthew, at that press conference earlier, he had been sort of essentially given the stiff arm to McCarthy.
That's right. And we should recall McConnell wasn't that active in the debt ceiling negotiations.
On purpose.
Right. And he may not be active.
It was one of those, you wanted the fight, you do it.
Right.
Yeah.
He might not be active this time either.
But it's a bad image
it really is.
And CBS polls show increasing Americans don't want age limits. That's going to continue.
Absolutely. This is something that has that 60, 70, 80 support. Betsy, Cornell, Matthew, thank you all. Up next, we're on the ground in Perry, Florida. That, of course, was where Hurricane Idalia hit hardest in the state. As they start their cleanup, former FEMA Chief Craig Fugate joins me to discuss how climate preparedness should play a role in disaster recovery. You're watching Meet the President. Welcome back. In a visit to FEMA headquarters today, President Biden announced he will visit Florida on Saturday to survey the damage Hurricane Idalia did to the Big Bend there, right where the Panhandle and the Peninsula come together. We told you yesterday the storm made landfall in Florida's Big Bend area as a Category 3. It then traveled through Georgia and the Carolinas, leaving a path of destruction from floodwaters and wind in its wake. But thankfully, the worst-case scenarios in many of these places didn't come true. Officials have now confirmed, though, that 3 people have died in connection with the storm. This new video shows the high floodwaters and devastation in Horseshoe, Florida. But this is one of these good news stories of how government can work, because as we learned yesterday in Horseshoe, nobody died because everybody evacuated. They listened. Everybody evacuated. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is on the ground in Perry right now as the city begins to take stock of the damage. And Maggie, you were telling me yesterday, it was tough to get communications in Perry yesterday. How are things today?
Things are still a mess, frankly, today. If you look at scenes like this, I mean, you can see kind of the work that crews and those who are kind of leading the cleanup here, which includes emergency operations, talking about FEMA headquarters. They're on the ground here as well. I mean, this is part of what was an antique store, essentially, and now you can see just basically this giant piece of metal sheeting. I also want to point out traffic is running through town, but there's kind of an eerie, constant reminder that things are not normal because we have generators. You might be able to hear it in the background, running traffic lights. The vast majority of the town here still does not have power. That's largely thanks to downed trees. We talked to a woman earlier, Deborah Mims, who rode out the storm in her house, does not have power, does not have AC because of trees that came crashing down in her neighborhood. Take a listen.
I've lived here this long and have never seen it this bad. And we weren't prepared to lose all of this. And, but we're all grateful. I don't know of any deaths, thank goodness. But it's devastating when you live in a town a long time. I sat in a comfortable chair and I had my cell phone in my hand and I had a flashlight and my little kitties were running around. And you just sit there and you listen and you don't know what's happening. You're just hoping that the roof doesn't come crashing in. And you say a lot of prayers, too.
Yeah, you say a lot of prayers, says Deborah. Chuck, you mentioned the deaths, and obviously there were tragic repercussions of this storm, but in every case, it was kind of a fluke, according to authorities. Florida Highway Patrol say 2 deaths here in this state were caused by car crashes during the storm. In Georgia, authorities say a tree fell on a car. So to your point, a lot of these communities, one sheriff said they were expecting like a Katrina situation. That was according to the Leon County Sheriff. And again, the worst did not come to fruition. But again, tragic circumstances in some communities.
Absolutely, but it's nice to hear that when you look at Horseshoe, people listen, right? We saved lives. Property can get replaced.
Exactly.
Lives are much cannot. Maggie Vespa on the ground for us in Perry. Maggie, thank you. And as we noted yesterday, Idalia is now the 5th hurricane to hit Florida's west coast in the last 8 years. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell attributed the rise in these storms, of course, to the warming water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, and said that her agency has to factor that climate shift into their emergency preparedness plans. For more on how we can prepare for this these extreme weather situations, I'm joined now by Craig Fugate. He's, of course, the former director of FEMA. He's currently a Florida resident, and before he ran FEMA, he was the guy that ran Florida's emergency management system during that 4-hurricane summer back in the early aughts. Craig, it's good to see you. Let me start with, you attempted to try to change the budgeting process at FEMA when you were there. There was an attempt to say, hey, look, let's not stick our head in the sands. We can know on average of how much disaster recovery money we need on an annual basis. But it didn't happen. What made that so difficult?
Well, we had sequestration, and then, for a variety of things. We did get some success with Speaker Ryan and Jack Lew when he was OMB director to at least get the catastrophic disasters funded above the top line. But I remember before they did that, we were dealing with Hurricane Irene, and we were down to hundreds of millions of dollars while responding to a major hurricane. So it's gotten better, and then it doesn't keep up because these big disasters keep wiping out the funds that Congress has to replace.
And I saw a really disturbing report yesterday about the NOAA Hurricane Hunter planes. 2 were getting serviced. 1 was reusable, and then it needed service. And suddenly, the National Hurricane Center was panicked, and they got an Air Force plane to go into the hurricane. And it looks like the forecast was accurate and all of that. But it sounds like it's funding issues that have slowed down the ability to have these operational hurricane hunting planes, no?
Yeah, I mean, we've got both the Air Force Reserve, which fly the C-130s, then we have the P-3s and the G-5 that the NOAA operations fly. And on the NOAA budget, just like everybody else, they have to fit everything into the overall top line of the Commerce budget. And so you get all these competing resources and fewer dollars available, things start to suffer. And again, this is where Congress has to make these calls, but it does have an impact.
Would you like to see the mission? I mean, do you believe that you could make disaster preparedness part of the FEMA mission? I think some in Congress wouldn't fully embrace that. But I think about, yesterday I was talking with the mayor of Tallahassee about how many power lines are buried in Tallahassee. And he admitted it's not been very good progress. It's better progress in South Florida. Development is newer there. There's some explanation to that. But we know that's costly. Why shouldn't that be a FEMA grant, if you will, right? In a more perfect world where the federal government helped local communities, because guess what? It would save money in the long run.
To a certain degree, that's exactly what they do with what they call building resilient and infrastructure communities. You heard the president announce that they're going to use some of the infrastructure money to help put power lines underground in Maui. So we know there are things we can do to protect infrastructure, reduce the impacts. There's funding. In fact, Congress has been providing much more funding than they had in the past, but it's an ongoing effort. And it needs to be addressing to the things we need to build resilience in based upon a changing climate threat, not just looking at the infrastructure that we built the last 100 years.
Right.
We need to really think about what's coming.
I mean, it's clear. I mean, that part of the Yucatan now is a launching pad for these storms. And this is something that, frankly, when you first started it, that was not a common thing. And now it is. I mean, we've got to sort of acknowledge this.
Well, this rapid intensification, I think, is the thing that's really stood out. We've not seen this many storms this close together go from a tropical storm in the morning to a Cat 4 and a 3 at landfall.
It's barely an identified low pressure, Craig. Forget storm. Yep. It's astonishing.
Well, again, this is what we're seeing with Hurricane Michael. Now with this storm, it's the rapid intensification. And again, it goes back to water, warm water. These are like heat engines. The warmer the water, the stronger they can get.
The insurance problem in the state of Florida, is this something that you think the federal government is going to have to help out with here in order to keep insurance companies from fleeing the state?
Well, I don't know. We may have to really rethink our model. Our model was always based upon people had homeowners insurance and FEMA helped out the folks that didn't. We're seeing that going more and more towards FEMA helping out, which I remind people, it's the federal taxpayer that's paying this.
Right.
And so as we see less insurance, less availability, as taxpayers we're paying more. So that's the policy question. Are our systems designed going forward as insurance becomes a luxury for many and unavailable to others, and a system that was based upon the majority of the people that have insurance, and there would be few people that needed federal assistance?
Yeah, no, I think you are right about that. And there's some people, I think, in the state of Florida that are thinking, maybe I'm just better off not having insurance. And that, because of the price and all of that, that's not a good model either. Craig Fugate, with a lot of wisdom that I hope people are taking in. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, possible progress in Ukraine's counteroffensive after months of hand-wringing here in the Pentagon and new fears about a potential weapons deal between North Korea and Russia. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Amid concerns that Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russia was stalling, Ukrainian officials now say they are making progress in the southern region of Ukraine, reclaiming multiple cities. Ukrainian forces say they believe they have finally broken through Russia's line of defense in the southeast, raising hopes this will reinvigorate troops on the front lines. It comes after reports of a meeting this month between senior NATO military chiefs and Ukraine's top general to reset Kyiv's military strategy. Meanwhile, the White House is out with a new warning today that weapons negotiations between North Korea and Russia are, quote, actively advancing. Joining me now is retired Admiral James Stavridis. He's, of course, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and he's NBC News' chief international analyst. Jim, let's start with, yesterday, if you and I had done this, I'd be asking, boy, when are we going to see a breakthrough, right? This counteroffensive. And lo and behold, and look, I hate to put this in these cynical political terms here in Washington, but they needed this breakthrough just as negotiations and debate start about a new supplemental. Ukraine needs to show progress here if they're going to keep this funding coming, no?
Absolutely. You can kind of hear the cracking on both sides of the political spectrum, Chuck. On the far right, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, that crowd, asking increasingly, why are we spending billions in Ukraine? On the left, others are saying, well, couldn't we use that money here in the United States? These are legitimate questions, but I would argue, I think you would agree, we need to continue. And yes, you're right. These breakthroughs, and I think we need to be a little cautious here, but compared to where we were a couple of weeks ago, looks like they're pushing through. That's vital. And here's a key thing to understand. Once they crack through that line, they get behind the Russian defenses. They can flank the Russian forces breaking north and south, or they can continue to drive toward the Black Sea. Not a good day for Russia. Pretty good news for the Ukrainian side in this debate.
But realistically, how many more fighting months are there? And what kind of progress, right? We got the winters coming. We're looking at 60 days. We're looking at 90 days. And, there's going to be calls for talks when there is a weather-inspired pause here. Where do you hope the Ukrainians are?
I hope that they will, as we just discussed, have broken through, breaking north and south, driving to the sea. That puts Putin in a very difficult situation, and particularly with the end of the Wagner group, Prigozhin, who was the one competent general that Putin had. So I guess he decided to blow him up in an airplane. I would hope that would be the moment the Chinese begin to say to Putin, let's get to the table. And frankly, your point, Chuck, I think quietly, softly, off stage, Zelensky is going to hear from the West. Now would be a good time for you to negotiate. When do we get to that point? I'd say probably toward the end of this year when a third combatant enters the field. That would be winter.
We got, technically, there were supposed to be parliamentary elections this fall in Ukraine, a presidential election next year. I think they're delaying the parliamentary elections. Costs a lot of money to try to do this in wartime. It seemed to be a hint that he'd like help to do this if they do this. Do you see the United States essentially helping to fund a wartime election in Ukraine, or waiting until after the fighting is stopped?
The former. I think we will move forward to assist, and I think that's money well spent. We've done this before in other scenarios. We certainly provide a lot of support for legitimate democratic processes. And I think this can be done in a way that does not impugn the Zelensky regime. He's immensely popular in his country, but like we always want to see democracy be the lead here. So yes, I think we should, and yes, I think we will.
You know, this is my shocked face that North Korea and Russia are thinking about doing a deal. I mean, you sit there, we're warning. This doesn't feel like news. We made a public decision to say this. Why? To prove that we know they're doing it? Like, explain why we made a headline about this. Because, again, I'm shocked that one bad actor is working with another bad actor.
Right. I mean, this is, could there be gambling in the house here?
Right.
And clearly, we are shining a light on this, and we should. Is it going to have a realistic impact? Probably not. I think the target, Chuck, is more Beijing than anything else. Yeah. And I think that's where the Klieg lights are going to start to go on. And again, the big flick here, the big casino, is getting China to put the pressure on Putin.
And Jim, is it just simply like regular old ammunition? That's what Russia needs from North Korea, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And frankly, North Korea doesn't have much else to offer at this
I was just
point.
going to say, that's about the one thing I think they can churn out. Jim Stavridis, always a pleasure to get your wisdom on the show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my pal Peter Alexander sitting in for my other friend, Allie Jackson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.